So today we're going to talk about increasing your empathy. I believe it will be the single biggest leadership skill needed for the rest of 2020 and going into 2021. And we'll talk about that in a bit, but I'll just talk with you about what we will do today because I know some of you love agendas. So here is our agenda. What we'll do is we'll talk about who is this guy, who am I, why would I be talking to you about empathy, why is empathy so important. We'll have a little story time because I love stories. We're going to talk about what the current research says. Science, we're going to talk about the science behind empathy because it's not, people often think empathy is just a soft skill, touchy-feely, but there's actually a lot of academic and scientific research that helps us understand what it is. And then we'll talk about some exercises to increase your empathy, and then we'll do some Q&A, which might just be my Q&A or the few of you that are watching along. So, moving along. Who am I? So, my name is Matthew. I am Toronto born and raised, and I mention that because we'll be talking about connection and experiences later on, so it's important that you know that I'm Toronto born and raised. I have a communications background, so for 20 years I worked in communications, in education, in nonprofit, and of course, like most people these days, I had lots of side gigs, or I had my hustle. I got interested in nice leadership in 2005. I put nice in quotes because at that point I wasn't calling it nice. I didn't know what it was. And what happened is I was working at a magazine and one of my coworkers asked me about all the people that I interview and what made me like some more than others. And so I went back and did some research on what I had written down and what I had compiled on each person, and I found that the leaders who I thought were most effective, that I liked the best, that I would want to work for or be like, were the ones that had a lot of gratitude, empathy, trust, honesty, generosity, and service. And those are what I defined as nice leadership. Now, we'll talk more about nice later on. From there, it really led me into completing a Master's of Arts in Leadership and Management. And the real motivation, the crux behind all of that was I wanted to do some intentional learning on this subject. I wanted to know where some more academic research was. I wanted to do some digging myself. And so now, for the past few years, I've been consulting. And I help companies with leadership and team development and some strategy. And once in a while, I dip my toe in communication still because, to be honest, I still love communications. And really, a lot of what I talk about in nice leadership needs great communications. So, okay, we're going to talk about empathy research. And my wife told me last time that I should be on camera more. So I'm not going to show you all the slides because, quite frankly, not all of them are awesome. And I will send you the whole slide deck. The whole slide deck will be available, and we'll go through it. So a few things that is happening right now. As you know, or if you don't know, I love keeping up on research. So some of the most recent research that has come out is this. 96% of employees consider empathy a vital leadership characteristic, which shouldn't be really that surprising. I mean, I can't imagine who are those 4% who are like, I don't really need empathy. They might be people that we think are in high stress situations, but I would imagine they would need it more. However, those same employees, 92% of them feel that empathy in the workplace is undervalued. In fact, they would say that two people who are equal, the one who has empathy will often be overlooked, because I think empathy is often misunderstood in the workforce. And here's a stat, and this isn't surprising because I think we've all seen it or read about it. If you're not familiar with what happened at Uber, this will ring true. 40% of women who work in the tech industry leave the sector in under 10 years, and they cite a lack of empathy as the reason they do that. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, there was last year, Uber lost one of its top female executives, and she cited, among many things, empathy was a huge reason she left. There's a lot more to it, research, read it. There's lots of stories on the web. I think she actually blogged about it herself. So it's a great story to read and learn about this. However, just think of how much better the the tech industry, we probably would have flying cars right now if we didn't do so much to push out women from the workforce. And of course, there's men who are leaving as well from the tech industry due to a lack of empathy, but this was the stat they came across. I'll jump back onto the slides for a second. So, when we look at some further empathy research, because people often say, well, does it really, is empathy just nice to have, or does it actually matter when it comes down to the nuts and bolts? And I want to let you know, I help companies make more money, right? Now, that's the bottom line. Or I help them achieve their goals if they're a nonprofit, like raise more money, be more effective, because that's really the bottom line. All of these nice leadership skills are shown to help increase the bottom line. And here's some stats, some research. This came out of Harvard. Companies with leaders who exhibit higher levels of empathy perform 20% better than their counterparts that are more callous. If you could just get your senior leadership team to be more empathetic, you potentially could do nothing different and see a 20% gain in revenue and profits. Senior managers, directors, and C-suite perform the worst at displaying empathy, which is exactly where we need it. And millennials want to work for a place that matches their values, and they value empathy. So if you think that empathy is not important in the workplace today, you'll be very sorely disappointed when you're not able to retain and keep the best talent. 16% of people, so this is from Luth Research. I talked about this on past webinars. I love Luth Research. They put out research every week on current trends, what the market is saying, etc. So this is from April 16th, this data came out, so very recent. 16% of people say they will stop working at home when COVID-19 is over. 22% say they will work less at home than they did before. But 62% say they will work the same or more often than they did before when COVID-19 is over. And why this is so important is we will have a workforce that demands the ability to work remotely or work at home. I didn't include it in this, but I've read some research from out of the Poynter Institute that said by 2025, there'll be something like 25% of the workforce in North America will work at home. COVID-19 will just accelerate that. And the problem with our lack of understanding and training around empathy is that leaders are not equipped with training to support workers who work at home or remotely. And the biggest factors remote workers say they face when working at home is social isolation, lack of social cues, and a lack of encouragement and emotional support. And those three things all require one skill set, empathy. So if we're going to move forward and be successful and retain the best talent, keep the best talent, we are going to need to increase our empathy. Now, as I promised, we're going to get to story time, but before we do that, I just want to talk to you about the Working From Home report. So I just take a quick break to tell you about the Working From Home report. Typically, this is a report that might be included if I was working with an organization that was trying to be better at working with remote employees or work from home employees. Right now, I'm offering it free on my website. It's at a personalized assessment you do, so you fill out 24 questions. It will then immediately send you a work from home report, and what it gives you is some great insight on how you can best work at home. Some tips for you, what to look out for when you're not doing great, and then also some communication tips for dealing with other personality types when you're working remotely. So one thing that I found in my work from home report, and I partner with a great company out of Phoenix, TTI. They do all the science behind this, and I train to deliver and facilitate the assessments. One thing I found for myself when I did mine is it had a great tip. It said every 90 minutes, take a break. And I started doing that, and I can't believe how refreshed I am after just a 5-minute break. Before, I used to just power through the entire day. but now I am taking breaks every 90 minutes. You can visit my website, leadingwithnice.com. There is a banner on the front page to get your free work from home report. There's no cost to this. Again, right now, my main focus is just on helping people, and that's what this is for. So I want to talk to you about a dentist. And it's an interaction a dentist had with a young woman one day. So it was the weekend, it was a Sunday morning, and a woman woke up and she had one of those toothaches. That if you've never had one like this, you are very fortunate. It's a kind of toothache that you are considering like taking measures to extract your own tooth from your mouth just to help the pain go away. If you've ever done something where you've chipped a tooth or lost a cavity and breathed in cold air, you know exactly what I'm talking about. However, multiply that times 10. That's the kind of pain she was feeling. She called her dentist. It was a Sunday morning. She assumed he wouldn't be there. She got a voicemail. Unfortunately, we're not here today. If this is a dental emergency, however, please call the dental emergency clinic and we will help you right away. She called the dental emergency clinic. However, it was clear across town. She did not have a car. It would have taken her about 4 hours to get there, and by then they would not have been able to guarantee that they could have taken care of her that day. So she phoned back her dentist and left a message saying, here's the situation. I can't get there by bus. I don't have enough money today for a taxi to get there. If possible, can you call me back and can we arrange something for first thing Monday morning? And she hung up. About 10-15 minutes later, she got a phone call, and it was her dentist. And the dentist said, listen, I'm just coming home from visiting some family. I'm about an hour away from the office. From where you live, if you get on the bus right now, by the time you get there, I should be arriving around the same time. We'll get you in there and we'll take care of your tooth. So she got there, he got there, he took care of her tooth. It was a root canal issue. She was in and out of there in about an hour and a half, back home, and she felt great. Now, why did that dentist decide that it was in his best interest or her best interest that he come in on a Sunday? Like, she was already willing to come in Monday morning. Yes, there's going to be a charge for that, but really, is it like, would it be such a large charge that it would make it worthwhile for him? And would he feel good about charging somebody who said they don't have enough money for a taxi just to come in on a Sunday? Just hold that thought for a minute, because I want to take you back to 30 years ago. I want to tell you another couple of stories. And we're going to go to Philadelphia. Now, at the time, 30 years ago, Philadelphia was ranked the 34th most dangerous city in the world. Now, when I first read that stat, I was like, 34, that's not that dangerous. Well, no, it's in the world. So we're talking about countries where corruption and crime is rampant, where there are warlords, where there is civil war going on. Philadelphia was the top 34th. There's pretty much multiple shootings every day. Crime was rampant. It was known as one of the targets for the war on drugs. The United States was doing that. Now, I'll take you into a hospital emergency room. And this is what I learned while researching empathy. Hospital emergency rooms actually have dentists on staff because dentists are uniquely qualified to take care of any throat, jaw, or nasal emergencies. So in this emergency room, the dentist is on staff and the doors burst open. It's a police officer with his partner on a chair. His partner had been shot in the face, and as soon as he came in, the nurse saw it and knew that she would need the dentist. She called the dentist over and said, hey, we need your help here. Can you please take care of this right away? Now, you can imagine what that scene would have been like, right? Clearly a call had gone out over the radio that this had happened because police officers start streaming in. It was a very busy time in the emergency room. Beds were full. He was literally starting to work on the police officer in the hallway. His partner yelling in his face to do what he can. Other people asking questions about who did it, what can you do, will he survive? Can you imagine the stress that would have been over? The dentist did this. He said, shut up, get out of my face, go away. I need to work to save this person's life. He was firm, but he told them what he needed to do. I want to take you forward 6 more months. It's late one evening. There's a doctor and a dentist there in the emergency room. Again, the door is bust open. There's been a car accident. A man is wheeled in on a gurney. He is very close to death. It is going to be very timely if they're going to save this man's life. The doctor whose job it is to lead tries everything to get his heart going. And the only way he figures that they'll get his heart going after they've tried everything else is to physically open him up and massage his heart with their hands. In order to do this, you of course need an anesthesiologist, other nurses, etc. Everybody was busy and they had to make a decision. Do we go forward with this and have potential problems, or do we just say, that's it, we've done all we can? The dentist stepped up and said, hey, listen, I actually trained as an anesthesiologist. I can do that for you while you're taking care of everything else. Sure enough, because he was able to do that work, the doctor was able to massage this man's heart. It started beating again, and he lived. Now, why am I telling you about this emergency room dentist, right? And these crazy experiences that I can't imagine any of us are familiar with. Well, the reason is it's that same dentist from Philadelphia all those years ago was the same dentist that came in on a Sunday to help a woman with her root canal. And the important thing here is that all this trauma and hurt and pain that the dentist witnessed in the emergency room, it didn't desensitize him. In fact, he would tell you it did the exact opposite. What it did is it helped him learn to put himself in somebody else's shoes in an extreme way. Often we have a hard time imagining what other people might be going through because we haven't experienced it ourselves. So I want you to keep this story in mind as we go through today, because a lot of what we talk to, I think you will think of this story and be like, oh, I get it now. Now, the thing about this dentist, his average online reviews give him a 4.65 out of 5. Now, if you research reviews online, you will find out that 4.6 is considered generally to be perfect, right? Nobody has a 5-star review with a lot of reviews. 4.6 is actually to be considered perfect. His average review on Google, Yelp, Facebook, etc. is 4.65. So clearly something is working for him. So, as I promised earlier, a second ago, it's time for science. Okay. Science. Let's make notes back here. Science. Okay. Okay. So I want to talk to you about an experiment that happened at the University of Virginia. And what they did is they were asking themselves the question, is empathy actually like hardwired into our brain, or do we have to learn it? So what they did is this. They had subject 1. They had them come in, hook them up to this machine that gave them like little electrical shocks, like the kind of shock that if you like rub your feet on some carpet and touch somebody, that little zap, it gives them that kind of shock. And then they also hooked them up to an fMRI machine, a functional MRI machine. And what that does is it actually gives the researchers a live view of what is happening in the brain as it happens. So as they would shock this subject, they would see different parts of the brain light up, right? That was the brain's response to what was happening to them. So they did this over, a few different times, unplugged the subject 1, brought in subject 2. Now, subject 2 was a good friend of subject 1. And so they hooked up subject 2 to the machine, and they put both of them into an fMRI. So both brains were being monitored, but only subject 2 was being shocked. As they shocked subject 2, the fMRI machine showed that subject 1's brain was lighting up in the exact same way as subject 2. Even though she was not being shocked, her brain was reacting just like her good friends. So that's interesting. So they unhook her and they bring in subject 3. Now subject 3 is actually a stranger to the first 2. They don't know each other, they haven't met. But they're all in the study. the two, subject 1 and 2, they sit and watch as subject 3 is hooked up to the electrical shock machine, fMRI machine. It's hooked up to all 3 of them now. As subject 3 is being shocked, subject 1 and 2 have no brain activity in that area. It's not resonating with them. They see it and they might be like flinching, but it's not firing those empathy connections in our brain. So why is it? Well, what they explained is empathy is actually described as something that we would think about as ourself. And I don't mean ourself like ourselves. I mean ourself in more of a holistic sense, like ourself. So think about like what makes us, what defines us. So ourself is actually an understanding of understanding. So we think of ourselves as people that are in our close connections, our family, close co-workers. That's how we define ourselves, people that are part of our close social circle. The other thing about empathy and how we define ourselves is it's not about solving problems or feeling better. So when we are in this close social network, this close circle, and with empathy, it's about just being able to immediately understand what the other person is feeling. So you might have experienced this. You know, when you're at the water cooler, and I'm speaking figuratively during this time, it could be on a Zoom call or at your desk, and somebody comes along and says, oh man, like, you know, I watched a movie last night. Have you seen it? And you say, oh no. And they say, oh, I really enjoyed it. The action scenes were great. And you're getting excited with them. That's because they are part of yourself. They are part of your understanding of who you are. And you understand how they understand, right? Because they're part of your social circle. It's this reality that empathy only extends to ourselves that we need to work on, that we need to increase. So we're going to talk about that later on in the webinar today. Now, I want to talk to you about a guy named Stephen Covey. And if you've spent any time chatting with me, you would know I'm a big fan of his. He wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in the book, he has this one line that has had a lot of impact on how I think about empathy. And it's this: to know something but not to do it is truly not to know it. Right? So for example, I can tell you I'm the fastest runner in the world. But if I don't actually run the fastest in the world, then I don't actually know that I'm the fastest runner in the world, right? If I tell you, oh, I'm always thoughtful, I'm always thinking of other people, and I never send birthday cards or call to check in on my friends if I haven't seen them for a while, well, then I'm actually not friendly. I'm not actually the most thoughtful person. Sorry, I could be friendly. I'm not actually the most thoughtful person. So how this relates to empathy is this. I remember speaking, I used to work in a college, and there was a young man in my office, and he was really bummed out. And so I said, hey, you know, man, what's going on? Like, how are you doing? What's up? He's like, oh, you know, I broke up with my girlfriend last night, and I'm really, you know, torn up about it. And they've been together for a long time. I think he was in his 3rd year, and I knew him from year 1, and I remember them being together from that time. So I got that they had been together for a while. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm very sorry to hear that. Sounds horrible. And I remember thinking in that moment, because I was doing empathy research, I'm like, oh, dag, like, if I need to know something or do something to know what he's feeling, does that mean I have to break up with my wife? No, of course not, right? That's not what we're talking about. So I want to draw a really clear divide that as we go on and talk about empathy, we don't need to have actually experienced what the other person is feeling to understand them. So, moving along. Okay, I want to tell you about the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Science in Germany. I was curious if they had an acronym, because that's a mouthful for me. They don't. And if they did, it'd probably be in German. So it wouldn't help me anyway. So they were really curious about this exact problem. How do we bridge the gap between our natural empathy and what's outside of that, of ourself? So they found out a few really cool things. The first is this: when we are in a matched emotional state, it actually expands our empathy a little bit. So if you're, if you're sitting at a baseball game or a sports game that you like, and your home team does something really good, it's not uncommon for you to turn and like give strangers high fives, right? You're all experiencing, you understand how they feel during that time. You're in a very matched emotional state. However, when emotions are different, you cannot easily understand the other's feelings. So what they found is this. When somebody was feeling very sad and somebody was feeling normal or happy, and they would connect and then have a conversation and ask each participant to write down how they're actually feeling. The sad person would write down, of course, how they're actually feeling, but the person who was not sad, their understanding of how they felt was actually significantly better. Like they did not think they were as sad as they were. They didn't see it through the same lens. And the other thing they found is that when we do exercises to increase empathy, it works. It's like a muscle. It needs to be exercised. So as we talk about exercises for empathy, I want to let you know, this is not something that can happen overnight. As you're increasing your empathy, as your workplace and your bosses are increasing their empathy, it won't happen right away. You need to exercise it the same way that you need to exercise your other muscles. So, why do we care about all this? As I said before, I talked about it a little bit earlier in the opening. Why do we care about being empathetic? And it's this. People who are empathetic and people who work for empathetic leaders take less sick days, have less physical ailments, and they feel they are more efficient at their work and it's higher quality. All of these three things are contributing to why organizations that have highly empathetic leaders have a higher net revenue of 20%. And the other thing is, being empathetic isn't an either or proposition. What that means is, it's not like you can be empathetic or effective. It doesn't mean you can be empathetic or a great leader. You can be empathetic and effective. You can be empathetic and a great leader. So, does it work in an organization? I want to talk to you about Wendy Levinson, and she's a Toronto native. She's here at the University of Toronto, and she did some research on two groups of people. They were doctors, and the two groups were this: doctors who had been sued and doctors who hadn't been sued. So as you can imagine, being sued is never fun. People often refer to it as the day they are sued as the worst day of their life. And this is what she found. The doctors who had not been sued spent an average of 3 minutes longer with each patient. And the questions they asked were things like this: do you understand what we just talked about? How do you feel about this? What do you think you'll do going forward? These are such easy questions. Imagine in your workplace, you have a meeting with your direct reports. At the end of it, you say, hey, do you understand what we just talked about? Can you tell me, like in your own words, what it means? Oh, okay, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Or, okay, no, perfect, but for this one thing, oh, okay, now you get it. Or, okay, now that I've asked you to do this assignment, can you tell me how you feel you might approach it? Okay, that sounds like a really good approach. Oh, I would suggest doing this maybe. That's empathy in action. The other story I want to tell you about is with Timberland, and what we're going to get out of it is this. She also found, Dr. Levinson, that empathy has the ability to jump from one person to the next. It's contagious, especially in like-minded people in an organization. And especially when that one person in the organization shows empathy towards a stigmatized group. So, I want to tell you about Timberland. And this is I got this story from Tim Sanders, who is by far one of my favorite authors. His works have really influenced me greatly. So, if you enjoy what we talked about today, then please definitely go check out some Tim Sanders' work, especially Love is the Killer app. It's my favorite book of his. So, after Hurricane Katrina, Timberland, the shoe company, was down in New Orleans helping with the cleanup of the aftermath of Katrina. So there's 4 busloads of Timberland workers. As they're about to leave, one of the workers, and just like middle management guy or something like that, not a CEO or a big leader, and not a new person to the organization. They look outside and they see one guy kind of trying to navigate all the wreckage, and he's walking very gingerly. So he's curious about this. He thinks something might be wrong. He goes out and says, "Hey man, what's the matter?" And he said, "Oh, my job is to clean up a lot of this scrap metal and put it in this bin. However, I just have running shoes and there's a lot of sharp pieces here and just doesn't work." He says, "Hey, what size are you?" He's like, 10. I'm like, "I'm a 10. Why don't we switch shoes? I have these Timberland work boots with steel-plated soles, steel toe, etc." And he's like, "Oh, really?" He's like, "Yeah, man, I'm going back to the office, and trust me, I have lots of shoes. So it's our last day here, and even if it wasn't, I could easily get another pair of Timberland work shoes." So they're like, "Great." So he switches them out for his Reeboks or whatever, gets back on the bus, and his employees, his fellow colleagues say to him, "Hey, man, can't help but notice you just gave your shoes away and traded them for these old Reeboks. What's that about?" So he tells me, he's like, "Oh, yeah, one of the biggest problems of the workers down here trying to clean up is they don't have proper footwear. So, it makes it really hard." So his coworkers were like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." So they all exited the buses, the first bus. They took off their shoes and just left them at the work site for workers to come. And then the other 3 buses did the same as well, too. What's so great about that is it's such a clear example of how one person showing empathy can impact an entire organization, especially when they're giving it to a stigmatized group. So the stigmatized group in this instance wasn't somebody who we would classically identify, people with mental health problems, people in poverty, etc. It was just a worker trying to do his job really well. So I want to share with you some more science, and that's about dopamine. So if you are not familiar with dopamine, it is a chemical in your brain that makes you feel good. So for example, when you got a great birthday gift, or when your friends took you out for dinner, when you found out you were pregnant, in most cases, I imagine, etc. Dopamine is a chemical that gives you a hit in your brain to make you feel really good. So the beauty of dopamine is it's actually like a huge Post-it note on that memory. So I'm using Post-it notes. I use them for reminders. So I often will put a Post-it note on my computer laptop to remind me that I need to do something. I'm leaving in the morning. Oh my gosh. It lost connection. All right. So I just lost connection there for a minute, so I hope you're still here. I'll keep on going. So dopamine acts like a huge Post-it note on that great feeling you've had. So what this means is when you go somewhere and you have a great experience, the dopamine is what helps you remember that to be a great experience. So I tell this story. My wife and I love roller coasters, and we often have gone to the local theme park here in Toronto, and we would just do a circuit of roller coasters because we love them. And we actually seek out roller coasters when we go to different theme parks and whatnot because we just love them so much. And that's because the dopamine is reminding us of how much we love that. Now, the best part about this is empathy is a huge distributor of dopamine. And not only when you give empathy, but when you receive it as well. So it's like a double win. When you show empathy, both you and the person you are giving it to get that dopamine hit. You both feel good. It reminds you oh, I want more of this. I want to do it again. The other thing it does is it helps lay the morality in your workplace. And I don't mean religious morality. I mean, it helps your workplace as an organization understand what's right and wrong, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what are the good things that are happening here versus the bad things that are happening here. And employees who say they work in highly empathetic environments are basically getting these feel-good hits every day, all day. So I think we've talked a lot about why we should be concentrating on empathy, what the benefits will be. We're going to move in quickly to how to build it. But before we do, I just want to talk to you about my podcast, and it's a little bit unique. It's a daily 2-minute podcast, and each week we tackle a topic or a discussion. This week we're talking about honesty in leadership. Next week we're moving on to candor in the workplace. And the other thing that I want to let you know about is it's actually on Alexa. So if you have an Alexa device in your house, you may not know that you can get what's called a daily flash briefing. And basically, daily flash briefing plays once a day, and it gives you headlines. So for example, in our house, I have the CBC daily flash briefing. I have another podcaster who I really enjoy, their daily flash briefing. And the Leading with Nice daily just gives you 2 minutes on this leadership thought or principle, and we spend the entire week on it. Some people I know like to go for a drive, and they will just listen to a week's worth in 10 minutes. But I just would love I'd love to invite you to subscribe to the Leading with Nice Daily. You can get it again on Amazon Echo devices or on your favorite podcast platform. And here's the exciting thing. In the next 2 weeks, I'm coming up on episode 100. And during the week of episode 100, I'll be giving away an Amazon Echo device every day. So you need to be subscribed, obviously, and listening to find out how to win. So head over to your favorite podcast destination or to Amazon, your Amazon Alexa device, and subscribe to the Leading with Nice Daily. So, as promised, how to build empathy. Now, I'm going to warn you in advance. You're going to hear the ways empathy is built, and it may surprise you because it's so simple. It is pretty easy to build empathy. And I think one of the reasons people discount it is because it is so simple. So, the first thing is this: volunteer hours. Now, you may know, and they may have this in your jurisdiction, they may not, but here in Ontario, all high school students need to complete a certain amount of volunteer hours. Now, the reason they do it is this. There's 3 reasons. The first is it promotes good civicness. So they find that students who have volunteered in high school go on to do things like mow their lawn, be nice to their neighbors, they don't double park, they do all the nice things that just make us kind of get along in society. The other thing, it also makes them vote. They're more likely to vote. The other thing that it does is it makes them less likely to go to jail. So people that have volunteered are often not the ones who are found being incarcerated. And the third thing it does is 2 things with empathy. First, students that displayed a high amount of empathy beforehand, it sends their empathy through the roof. It just accelerates their ability to be empathetic and makes them better leaders. But for students that did not have any or very little empathy, so not the students that were kind of average, because those ones, they go through the roof, but the ones that did not have very much empathy or showed very little empathy, what they discovered is these students were often ones that came from homes or families where empathy just wasn't really a priority. They sometimes had trauma in their life. They just had not experienced what it meant to have somebody show you empathy, to understand how you're feeling. And what it did for these students is it actually introduced them to empathy for the very first time. So whereas before they were bankrupt in empathy, after the volunteering in high school, they now knew what it looked like to be empathetic and to receive empathy. And that was huge. Now, when I say volunteering, I understand you probably have a full-time job. If not, you're busy with other things. And you're like, man, I don't have time to volunteer. Well, here's the good news. The studies show that 1 hour every other week is actually kind of the max volunteering you can do to help your empathy. You can volunteer for 40 hours a week. It won't necessarily do that much more to help you increase your empathy. Now, some people love volunteering. My sister runs, and she talks about getting a runner's high. I have never ran and been like, this is awesome. I want to do more of this. So I don't understand it. Now, the same thing is with volunteering. I know some people that just love to volunteer. Same idea. Now, just because you volunteer less does not make you less helpful or whatnot. But volunteer for 1 hour every other week. And the other thing is, you don't have to volunteer in an area you don't want to. So for example, I care deeply about food security, but I don't want to move and unpack food boxes at a food bank, right? I want to use my skills, my communications, my strategy, my team development skills in volunteering. So volunteer in an area where you actually want to, where it'd be helpful to you. So volunteer 1 hour every week. That will help increase your empathy. The second one is this: be mindful. And you're like, oh man, really? Like, does that actually help? Yes. The science shows that if you are mindful about things like walking into a room and recognizing if it's cold, seeing who is there, what is physically going on, just opening your eyes and taking it in, being mindful will help you understand and increase your empathy. So, is it hot? Is it cold? What is the crowd like? It's so simple. The research that's been done is they ask people to just walk through a room and just go right through the door. And then they ask them, okay, how do they feel, this, that. They would do some empathy research. And the baseline would say the same. Then they would say to the other group, we want you to go through here, but we want you to tell you 5 things you notice. And they would, at the exit, they would tell the researchers the 5 things they noticed, and then ask them some questions around empathy, and they'd find it would increase just a little bit with that little bit of work. So the next one is my favorite, and it's to imagine, to daydream. Yes, I am telling you permission. You want to become a better leader, you want to grow your empathy, daydream. It actually helps you get outside of yourself, right? And that self we talked about earlier on. It helps you dream and understand what it might be like to be in a situation, an arena that is not you. I don't mean just daydream about bad things, but daydream about good things and situations that might be tougher as well. Aristotle, he actually advocated reading poetry. And he actually said, read poetry and avoid nonfiction. Reading nonfiction, he would say, I'm going to quote him. He would say this: when you read nonfiction, it tells you what did happen. When you read poetry, it tells you what could happen. And that is just so key for increasing our empathy. Reading fiction and reading poetry, it lays out situations that you may not have had the opportunity to understand for yourself. It gives you the ability to read and learn from somebody else's point of view in a very clear way. Now, we all know George Orwell. He wrote Animal Farm in 1984. Before he was an author, he was actually a police officer in London. And he was a police officer in the 1920s, 1930s. And one day he said to himself, I spend most of my time arresting homeless people. Like, why am I doing that? And what is it like? So he actually did this. He went out, took a week vacation, bought some shabby clothes, didn't tell his family where he was going, told him he'd be back in a week, and he actually lived as a homeless person for a week. He went and lived in an abandoned building, and he said he got harassed by police, he had to scavenge for food, he was hungry most of the time, and he actually points to that experience as having a huge influence on the books he wrote and helping to understand other people. And he had a term for it. He said he tried someone else's life on. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to try someone else's life on in such an extreme example, but some of the ways you can try someone else's life on is by attending a religious service with someone who does not subscribe to the same faith as yourself. And I actually think if we all did this, it could end wars. Ask a friend of yours who you know whose mother or father is experiencing a health issue like dementia or like a longer term situation, and ask if you can accompany them as you go to the hospital to visit, or the retirement home or old age home to visit, just to be there. Those are two really easy ways to try someone else's life on without having to live like George Orwell did for a week. There's three more things that you can do that are really easy. Keep a journal of the nice things you do. And when I say this, people are often like, oh man, like, how high is this bar going to be? Like, how nice do I have to be? And to be honest, science tells us when you keep a journal of the nice things, and nice things include things like asking somebody at your office how their day was, offering to wait 5 more minutes to help somebody carry their boxes to the other room for the workshop they're doing. That is the kind of nice thing I want to encourage you to start recording. The science says that if you do this, it will help you increase your empathy. And the key is, though, help someone every day. Do something nice every day. Again, it's like a muscle. You have to exercise it. The next one is I get teased for a lot. One of my favorite things to do is talk to strangers. If I'm in a cafe, I'm like looking over and being like, oh, like I wonder what that person's doing, and just saying, hey, I'm Mathieu, this is what I do, nice to meet you, we're in this small cafe together. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh, I hate people like you. That's okay. It's okay. Not everybody is going to like people like me. I'm okay with that. But when you talk to strangers, it gives you the opportunity to notice things about them. Remember that experiment we talked about earlier about being mindful? This is a really practical way to put this into practice, because here's what you're going to do. You're going to talk to somebody you see on the bus every day, like a person that you recognize, somebody you're sitting next to in a cafe. When you arrive early for a show, you say, hey, how you doing? I'm Mathieu. How's your time in? Just saying hey, because I'm friendly. And here's what it's going to do. Those people that you see all the time, those strangers, you're going to have to be mindful of who they are and what they've said. So if they say, how are you doing? They say, oh, pretty good, just finishing my last paper for school. 2 weeks later, you need to ask them, hey, how'd your paper go? Otherwise, you're actually not doing it. Remember, to know something but not to do it is truly not to know it. So it forces you to be mindful, and it really helps your empathy. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the Yuill. Now, I started talking about empathy in 2008. And I remember in 2010, I was listening to a recording the other day of this workshop I did, a variation of it. And I actually said, hey, have you guys heard of the selfie? Like, people didn't, like in 2010, it wasn't really a popular thing yet. And selfie sticks hadn't been invented. And I talked about the selfie. And what I encouraged them to do then, and I'm going to encourage you to do today, is to turn the camera around. And I don't mean like a physical camera, but with your own awareness, turn your camera around and start concentrating on other people. Just being mindful of other people instead of like all about yourself. I'm not suggesting you give up taking care of yourself, but being mindful of other people. And finally, I want to encourage you to end every conversation with this. End every conversation with, is there anything else I can do for you? Or is there anything I can do for you? Now, 99% of the time, people will say, no, I'm good, thank you very much. And that 1% of the time, they'll say something like, these are real examples. Actually, yeah, like I'd really love to get into accounting, but I don't know any accountants. Do you know any accountants? And I'm like, yeah, I know like 3. Can I email them and ask them if they can connect with you? Oh, that'd be so great. Another one is like, yeah, like I don't know I'm new to town and I'm not sure which way to take the bus. And I'm like, oh man, I've been taking this bus for like 30 years. And just saying, yeah, it goes there. And that person stopped and said, this was providing me anxiety all day that I would get lost on public transit. And now you just drew me a map. Ask people every day, at the end of every conversation, is there anything I can do for you? And finally, I just want to encourage you. You can do this. It is probably the easiest, nice leadership skill to increase. And you can actually, by doing it yourself, you will help others in your organization do it. And only then will our organizations be prepared for what's next coming out of COVID-19 and into 20 and 2021. So you have the capacity. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm sorry again for the technical issues we had. I think we had several dozen people signed up and they weren't able to stick around, or they weren't able to find it in the end. I'm sorry. I'm going to share this slide deck with everybody. And at the end, I've put all the sources for the statistics and research that I cited today. If you want to read more about that, you can. But this is a good summary. And I'll just ask, we'll spend another few minutes, maybe the next 10 minutes with questions.